Today we are going to begin reading a new text titled George's Secret Key to the Universe. This was written by Lucy and Stephen Hawking. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back cover, as you should always do before you begin reading a new text. Join George on an adventure that is out of this world. When George Greenby follows his escaped pig out of his yard, he meets his new neighbors, Annie, her father Eric, and their computer, the super intelligent, super powered Cosmos. Before long, George and Annie are on an adventure of a lifetime and traveling through outer space. But someone else has plans that will lead them into terrible danger. Lucy and Stephen Hawking, George's Secret Key to the Universe, is an exciting, out-of-this-world adventure full of scientific facts about the entire solar system. It explains concepts such as Stephen Hawking's most recent theories on black holes and includes full-color photos of fascinating images from outer space. Let's read the review by Publishers Weekly. It says, "What better way to interest young readers in science than for one of the world's most renowned theoretical physicists to put his subject at the center of a children's book?" This is a photo of Lucy and Stephen Hawking. Stephen is the father of Lucy, as well as two other children. As you can see, Stephen is obviously paralyzed. He has a disease that is known as Lou Gehrig's disease. He was not always paralyzed, but has spent most of his life since the age of 21 as a paraplegic. As always, please follow along as I read aloud to you. Chapter 1 begins on page 1. "Pigs don't just vanish," thought George as she stood staring into the depths of the very obviously empty pigsty. He tried closing his eyes and then opening them again to see if it was some kind of horrible optical illusion. But when he looked again, the pig was still gone, his vast muddy pink bulk nowhere to be seen. In fact, when George examined the situation for a second time, it had gotten worse, not better. The side door of the pigsty, he noticed, was hanging open, which meant someone hadn't shut it properly, and that someone was probably him. "Georgie!" he heard his mother call from the kitchen. "I'm going to start supper in a minute. So, you've only got about an hour. Have you done your homework?" "Yes, Mom," he called back in a fake cheery voice. "How's your pig?" "He's fine, fine," said George squeakily. He threw in a few experimental oinks just to make it sound as though everything was business as usual. Here in the small backyard that was full of many vegetables had one enormous but now mysteriously absent pig. He grunted a few more times for effect. It was very important that his mother did not come out into the garden before George had time to think of a plan. How he was going to find the pig, put it back in the sty, close the door, and get it back in time for supper, he had no idea. But he was working on it, and the last thing he needed was for one of his parents to appear before he had all the answers. George knew the pig was not exactly popular with his parents. His mother and father had never wanted a pig in the backyard, and his dad in particular tended to grind his teeth quite hard when he remembered who lived beyond the vegetable patch. The pig had been a present. One cold Christmas Eve a few years back, a cardboard box full of squeaks and snuffles had been delivered to their front door. When George opened it up, he found a very indigent piglet inside. George lifted him carefully out of the box and watched him in delight with his new friend, skidded around the Christmas tree on his tiny hooflets. There had been a note taped to the box. "Dear all," it read. "Merry Christmas. This little fellow needs a home. Can you give him one? Love, Grandma. George's dad hadn't been delighted by the new addition to his family. Just because he was a vegetarian, it didn't mean he liked animals. Actually, he preferred plants. They were much easier to deal with. They didn't make a mess or leave muddy hoof prints in the kitchen floor or break in and eat all of the cookies left out on the table. But George was thrilled to have his very own pig. The presents he'd received from his mom and dad that year were, as usual, pretty awful. The home-knitted purple and orange striped sweater from his mom and the sleeves that stretched right down to the floor. He had never wanted a xylophone, and he had a hard time looking enthusiastic when he unwrapped a build-your-own ant farm. What George really wanted, above all things in the universe, was a computer. But he knew his parents were very unlikely to buy him one. They didn't like modern inventions and tried to do without as many standard household items as they could. Wanting to live a purer, simpler life, they washed all their clothes by hand and didn't own a car and lit the house with candles in order to avoid using electricity. It was all designed to give George a natural, improving upbringing, free from toxins, additives, radiation, and other such evil phenomena. The only problem was that getting rid of everything that could possibly harm George. His parents had managed to do away with lots of things that would also be fun for him. George's parents might enjoy going on environmental protest marches or grinding flour to make their own bread, but George didn't. He wanted to go to a theme park, ride a roller coaster, or play computer games, or take airplanes somewhere far, far away. Instead, for now, all he had was his pig. And a very fine pig he was, too. George named him Freddy and spent many happy hours dangling over the edge of the pigsty his father had built in the backyard, watching Freddy root around in the straw or snuffle in the dirt. As the seasons changed and the years turned, George's piglet got bigger and bigger and bigger until he was so large that in dim lighting he looked like a baby elephant. The bigger Freddy grew, the more seemed to feel cooped up in his pigsty. Whenever he got a chance, he liked to escape and rampage across the vegetable patch, trampling on carrot tops, munching on the baby cabbages, and chewing up George's mom's flowers. Even though she often told George how important it was to love all living creatures, George suspected that on days when Freddy wrecked her garden, she didn't feel much love for his pig. Like George's dad, his mom was a vegetarian. But George was sure he had heard her angrily mutter, "Sausages," under her breath when she was cleaning up after one of Freddy's more destructive outings. On this particular day, however, it wasn't the vegetables that Freddy had destroyed. Instead of charging madly about, the pig had done something much worse. In the fence that separated George's garden from the one next door, George suddenly noticed a suspiciously pig-sized hole. Yesterday, it definitely hadn't been there, but then yesterday, Freddy had been safely shut in his sty, and now he was nowhere to be seen. It meant only one thing, that Freddy, in search for adventure, had burst out of safety, out of the backyard, and gone somewhere he absolutely should not have gone. Next door was a mysterious place. It had been empty for as long as George could remember, while all the other houses in a row had neatly kept backyards, windows that twinkled with light in the evenings, and doors that slammed as people ran in and out. His house just sat there, sad, quiet, and dark. No small children squeaked with joy in the early morning. No mother called out of the backyard door to bring people in for supper. On the weekends, there was no noise of hammering or the smell of fresh paint, because no one ever came to fix the broken window frames or clear the sagging gutters. Years of neglect meant that the garden had roided out of control until it looked like the Amazon jungle had grown up on the other side of the fence. On George's side, the backyard was neat, orderly, and very boring. There were rows of string beans strictly tied to stakes, lines of floppy lettuces, frothy green carrot tops, and well-behaved potato plants. George couldn't even kick a ball without landing splat in the middle of a carefully tended blueberry bush without squashing it. George's parents had marked out a little area for George to grow his own vegetables, hoping he would become interested in gardening, perhaps grow up to be an organic farmer. But George preferred looking up at the sky to looking down at earth. So his little path of planet